What did this gigantic continent really look like? What were their cities made of? Who were their people? And above all, are there still traces of the Lemurians among us today? If you think the Lemurian architecture is wild, brace yourself. This is where things get genuinely bizarre. The modern accounts of Lemuria from New Age researchers describe Lemuria as a civilization with such groundbreaking technology that sounds more like sci-fi than ancient history. The Lemurians had no electricity as we do today, yes. Yet their cities glowed with light anyway, bright light that came from the crystals themselves. This is what some accounts call living light, especially because it responded to consciousness, coming up when people were near and dimming when rooms were empty. According to Gaia's historical research on Lemuria, their technology revolved around resonance and vibration. The Lemurians mastered the use of specific frequencies for construction. What this means is that they didn't lift stone blocks with ropes and pulleys the way we do. Instead, they used sound. Hard to accept, but with precise tones, they could make massive stones levitate, allowing them to stack heavy blocks with perfect accuracy. Unbelievable, right? There is more to the power of sound in the Lemurian age. With these tones, they created healing chambers. These are rooms where they use combinations of sound, color, and crystal resonance to treat injuries and illnesses. They encoded water with specific energies for healing and growth, improving both crops and human vitality. No doubt everything within their ecosystem must have been maximized for higher living. Solar energy also played a major role. Not the solar panels, you know, those are crude by comparison. The Lemurians were said to have used devices to capture and store solar energy in ways we still don't understand. This way, they created sustainable power sources that never went down. And if you wonder how they moved around, there were the vehicles. According to some accounts, the Lemurians built flying craft. Not with engines and fuel, but with that same crystalline technology. And if you dare to push the boundaries a bit, there are whispers that their aircraft could become invisible at will. In his book, Scott Elliott himself describes seeing records of Lemurians using crystals to propel boats, not with sails or oars, but with focused energy emanating from carefully tuned crystal chains. This is the height of your sci-fi novels, don't you agree? Now you might be thinking, this sounds impossible. And you'd be right to be skeptical. We have no physical evidence of any of this technology, no artifacts, no ruins with glowing crystals or levitation devices. But here's what makes it interesting. Many ancient cultures, completely separate from each other, describe similar technologies in their myths. The Vimanas of ancient India told tales of flying palaces and cities that glowed with inner light, even healing temples that use sound and vibration. Would you say this was a mere coincidence? Were these tales just random myths passed down by ancestors? What if they were faint memories of something that actually existed, of Lemuria? If we can believe the stories our grandparents told us, why is it so hard to accept this? But let's step away from the cities for a moment. Because according to the accounts, Lemuria's natural world was as extraordinary as its technology. In The Lost Lemuria, Scott Elliott talks about a world still in the age of reptiles. From his records, dinosaurs didn't just exist, they dominated, especially the massive plesiosaurs who lived in the warm inland seas. Another dinosaur class, pterodactyls, flew overhead, with their wingspans reaching over 16 feet. On land, these dinosaurs could reach lengths of 40 to 50 feet. And guess what? Some of the largest specimens discovered in fossil records measure even more. But here's where the descriptions get really strange. The Lemurians didn't just live alongside these creatures, they domesticated them. Can you imagine this? The Lemurians were said to have trained massive reptiles the same way we train dogs. They used the dinosaurs for hunting, protection, and even for transportation. Picture this: a Lemurian, 12 to 15 feet tall, holding a sharpened staff and leading an enormous plesiosaur-like creature on a thick rope made from twisted vines, using the beast's strength and aggression to hunt other animals. Top-tier lifestyle. We could also talk about their impressive vegetation. From their giant tree ferns, they created canopies so thick that sunlight barely reached the forest floor. According to Scott Elliott, the Lemurians learned to cultivate wild grains, improving them over thousands of years into the cereals we recognize today: barley, oats, millet, you name it. But wheat was different. Scott Elliott makes an extraordinary claim. Wheat wasn't evolved on Earth at all. It was brought ready-made by advanced beings from another world, specifically to feed humanity. A gift that required no evolution, no selective breeding, just given. Not just that, the Lemurians also kept animals we'd recognize, the ancestors of llamas, large cat-like creatures, wolves. Some accounts mention the ancestors of Irish elk roaming the hillsides in herds, too wild to easily approach, but still under some degree of human control. Well, the Lemurians had them under control. Records have it that Lemuria became a living laboratory of animals that would later solidify into the species we know today. Now we come to the most unsettling part of this story: the Lemurians themselves. According to Scott Elliott's accounts, which he claimed came from ancient records, the early Lemurians were barely human at all, at least not by our standards. Imagine this. They stood somewhere between 12 and 15 feet tall. Their skin bore a dark, yellowish-brown color, almost mahogany. Their lower jaws were pronounced, giving them an ape-like profile. Elliott noted that their faces were strangely flattened, with almost no forehead. That is, where the forehead should have been, there was just a thick roll of flesh, and their heads sloped backward and upward in this unsettling way. Their eyes were small, but piercing. But that's not as strange as it gets. The Lemurians' eyes were set so far apart that these beings could see sideways as much as forward. And then there was the third eye on the back of their heads that allowed them to see in all directions. In a 1904 lecture at the Royal Institution, Professor Ray Lancaster pointed out that many ancient reptiles had enlarged openings in their skulls, suggesting a third eye that actually worked. To date, modern lizards still have remnants of this organ. In humans, the third eye is said to have dissolved to form the pineal gland, but in the Lemurians, this third eye remained active for millennia. It served as their primary organ not just for physical sight, but also for psychic vision. These beings could literally see into other forms of reality. As for their limbs, their arms and legs were way longer than ours. Elliott noted that they couldn't fully straighten them at the elbows or knees, leaving them with a hunched posture. Their hands and feet were enormous, with their heels projected backward in this bizarre way that let them walk backward or forward. For their clothes, they covered themselves in thick animal skins, most likely from creatures we only know as fossils now. But here's what makes this even stranger. According to Scott Elliott, the Lemurians evolved. Over millions of years, they went through what he calls 7 distinct subraces. The earliest Lemurians had soft bodies with no bones. They couldn't stand upright. Instead, they sluggishly crawled across the ground like enormous insects. But gradually, generation by generation, their bodies solidified. Cartilage eventually hardened into bone. By the 3rd and 4th subraces, the Lemurians could finally stand and walk upright. By the 5th subrace, they had become the 12 to 15-foot giants with 3 eyes. And this was the subrace Scott Elliott describes in most detail in his book. But as they progress, we learn something interesting. By the seventh subrace, their height had decreased. Their features had become less grotesque. They'd also lost most of the function of the third eye. Slowly, they began to look more human, more like us. According to Scott Elliott, the descendants of this seventh subrace eventually intermixed with the earliest Atlanteans. The result was offspring that looked remarkably similar to some Native American tribes today. Only this time, there was one stark difference: weird bluish hair. But the questions remain. If Lemuria existed, where's the evidence? We can point to the structures scattered across the Pacific and Indian Oceans that don't quite add up. These are ancient sites that seem too sophisticated for the cultures we think built them. Starting with Easter Island. Nearly 900 Moai statues, some standing 30 feet tall, weighing 80 tons, carved with primitive stone tools. When asked how they moved these giants, the natives say the statues walked to their locations. Modern researchers demonstrated that rocking motions using ropes could work. But the legends persist that something more was involved. Then there's Nan Madol in Micronesia. Nearly 100 artificial islands built from basalt pillars weighing up to 50 tons, stacked like logs across 200 acres of reef. Local legends say the stones flew through the air, guided by sound. Doesn't this sound like the same Lemurian technology described by Elliott? There is also the Yonaguni Monument off Japan's coast, which features carved steps and right angles too precise to be natural. If it was man-made, it dates to 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, exactly when Lemuria fell. Finally, there is Adam's Bridge between India and Sri Lanka. Satellite imagery shows a 30-mile chain of limestone shoals. Hindu texts call it a bridge built by god Rama's army. Yes, none of these sites are approved by science to say that Lemuria existed. But they suggest something. They show us that ancient cultures were building with techniques we don't fully understand. Makes us wonder, what if they got the info from a greater civilization that came before? But do you know the strangest part about what Lemuria looked like? It's not in the past. It's about right now. Because according to thousands of believers, Lemuria survived. Underground. Underneath Mount Shasta in Northern California. Unbelievable, right? When Lemuria collapsed 12,000 years ago, the survivors carved huge caves inside Mount Shasta using sound and crystalline technology. And together, word has it that they built Telos, the crystal city of light, existing on 5 levels with 1.5 million inhabitants. People claim to see them, tall figures in white robes walking around town, appearing and disappearing. In 1904, prospector J.C. Brown discovered an 11-mile tunnel with a chamber containing gold and 10-foot mummies. He organized an 80-person expedition in 1934 to relocate it. However, on departure day, Brown vanished. Nobody saw him again. In 2014, someone dug a massive 60-foot hole on the mountainside. But the Forest Service quickly filled it up, while offering an official explanation that read, "Illegal gold prospecting." But in truth, locals whispered about someone trying to find the entrance to Telos. What did ancient Lemuria actually look like? Maybe the answer isn't buried in the past. Maybe it's hidden underneath our feet, waiting to be discovered.